banks are slowly realizing that they need an enforcer to tell them what the rules are and update those rules if necessary. The libertarian argument we can have a world without rules was always stupid, but in practice, until now, conservatives meant with a wink and a nod that you'd have regulators that were industry friendly, not that you'd have no regulators. And these regulators, at the very least, sorted out disagreements among the banks and financial firms. But now Trump has done what generations of libertarians asked for, but really didn't want, which was to have a world without a regulator. That means a bunch of consumer protection and banking laws still exist, but have no enforcement regime. So do the banks follow those laws or not? What about laws that structure entire industry-wide practices? And no private rights of action aren't really viable. Those pesky arbitration agreements conservatives also love made sure of that. Is Schrodinger's law, or perhaps a conservative movement that finally caught the car? Is unfairness, deception, or abusive practices in financial products now legal? Sort of, but maybe not. In other words, conservatives are going to have to rebuild some sort of administrative capacity under a different name that's going to be doing a lot of the same things. David Dayen wrote an article on the CFPB. He said, it turns out that bankers and financiers hate not having an agency enforcing consumer protection laws. It tips the balance towards big banks and could break mortgage and other markets that rely on continuous supervision. Community banks and credit unions are still being regulated and big banks aren't. Rules that make mortgage markets run are in limbo. The industry doesn't want to break the means by which it makes money. This will cause a ton of jobs to be lost at financial institutions too if there's no regulatory enforcement. Tons of back office operations departments are at risk of being shut down if there's no reason for them to exist. I mean, that part for sure, but that's, again, an incredible opportunity for more profit. That means the banks are going to be run more efficiently, you know, with less people. It's so funny that every single piece of regulation, every single rule was written with the ink of blood, okay? And it's ironic that these guys that man the ship and pick apart these regulatory agencies will inevitably cause genuine collapse. And within that genuine collapse, someone will still go back and rewrite the exact same fucking rules because they exist for a good reason. This is not to say that there aren't like ridiculous rules or whatever, ridiculous rules or regulations. Of course there are. Having said that, however, this kind of approach where you just undermine these regulatory agencies that are doing good, that are tasked with like actually good shit, you know, making sure that there's some regulatory mechanism against the banks, taking that apart might lead to short-term profits for these banks, but there is a reason why it was designed to begin with. There's a reason for why we have these rules. It's so stupid. Just like the FDIC. Why does the FDIC exist? Why are banks paying this fee to this agency that has tremendous power over banks in moments of crisis? Because without it, if banks are not regulated, when bank runs occur, people will just destroy the economy. It has happened before. If you have no more confidence in your bank, if the money that you gave to your bank is no longer real money, real currency, you're going to panic. You're going to want to go back to that bank and you're going to want to take out all the money that remains and put it under a pillowcase. Okay? That's what happened, understandably. Like, what's next? Are we going to go back to every single bank issuing their own currency like we are literally in the Wild West? Fuck it. No more legal tender, okay? Every bank issues their own paper currency and nobody has any control over what how much that currency is actually worth. Let's just go back to the barter system, as a matter of fact. It's ridiculous. And it's ironic that I'm saying this, but like, that's kind of what cryptocurrency is. That's kind of what they want to do, you know? It's craziness. Yeah. DeFi, baby. Decentralized finance. Oh, anyway, now that I briefly talked about the inevitable collapse, let's get to Russia.
Trump has just announced that he has held a phone call with Vladimir Putin.
I gotta pee.
They covered issues on the Middle East, energy, artificial intelligence, but the concentration of that conversation was Ukraine. And Donald Trump said they discussed that they agreed they wanted to stop the war, stop the deaths in the Russia-Ukraine war. They have agreed to visit each other's nations. Trump has said he will call Zelensky in the very near future, and he said that he and Putin agreed to have respective teams start negotiations immediately. There you can see Donald Trump now posting on it. We both agreed we want to stop the millions of deaths taking place in the war with Russia and Ukraine. And President Putin even used my very strong campaign motto. He says, common sense. We both believe very strongly in it. And he said we agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's nations. We have also agreed to have our respective teams start negotiations immediately. So a highly significant moment. Donald Trump is wasting no time. He's been involved in the Middle East. He is now getting involved in Ukraine. Let's bring in our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn. And so, Dominic, it seems that the negotiations are going to get underway pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, this is a bombshell notification from Donald Trump from the White House following a bombshell speech by his defense secretary in Brussels. But just to reiterate, because it is very significant, Mark, is what he's saying here, saying that after this 1.5-hour phone call, we agreed to work together. He is saying, the American president, agreeing with the Russian leader, very closely, including visiting each other's nations. And the Kremlin has, in the last 5 minutes or so, confirmed that Putin and Trump have agreed to meet. Not quite sure where, but there will be, it seems, another Trump-Putin summit. We've also agreed, the White House, or Donald Trump is saying there, to have our respective teams start negotiations immediately. And this is the significant bit also. We will begin by calling President Zelensky of Ukraine to inform him of the conversation. So that's a break. You know, we have seen all day efforts by not just John Healey, the British Defence Secretary, but other members of NATO to kind of stick fingers in the dike, the crumbling dike of NATO solidarity and unity after what Pete Hegseth said, the Defence Secretary there, trying to give the impression that there is still unity, whereas that impression, as I say, is crumbling, because it's a break with what has been 3 years of firm and determination by NATO members to be united and behind the principle of not talking about Ukraine. Nothing is discussed about Ukraine without Ukraine. So we now have a break with that. We have the American president meeting on the phone, talking for an hour and a half with his Russian counterpart, not including Ukraine, discussing Ukraine.
Putin will never allow Ukraine to join NATO, as he shouldn't. I mean, guys, America was never serious about Ukraine joining NATO. Other NATO nations were never serious about allowing Ukraine to join NATO. This is something that I've repeatedly talked about over and over again. Finally, for all the haters in the chat, admit Hasan was right. They're never going to admit that, okay? Like, this was an inevitability, because the war was what determines the outcome of Russia's unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine, was always going to be what happens on the ground, in the battlefield.